Welcome back to the Moments in Music, the show where we dive into stories behind the artists who shaped the soundtrack of our lives. I'm your host, and today we're exploring the gentle, poetic, and heartbreakingly short life of one of America's most beloved singer-songwriters, Jim Croce, a man who wrote about love, loss, and mischief, working class heroes, and everyday life with uncommon honesty, a voice that could make you smile, laugh, or cry, sometimes within this same song. This is the story of Jim Croce. Jim Croce was born in 1943 in South Philadelphia to an Italian American family. He wasn't the kid you would expect to become famous. No spotlight, no star treatment. He grew up listening to ragtime R&B and folk music, anything that came out of the family's old radio. In an interview later in life, Croce said he learned to play guitar because I found out I could make friends easier that way. And that tells you something important about him. Jim wasn't trying to be a star. He just loved telling stories, and music became his language. He played in garage bands, local bars, fraternity houses, anywhere that could let him strum a few chords. But his life didn't open the door for him easily. Before his first ever hit touched the radio, Croce lived what he called a patchwork life. He worked more than 30 different jobs, from everything from truck driving to construction to teaching to working in a diner. These those jobs shaped the characters in his music: the truckers, bar regulars, blue collar folks, the ones living paycheck to paycheck. He didn't write about glamorous lives, he wrote about real ones. Jim met his future wife, Ingrid, in college, and together they tried to break into the folk music scene. But fame didn't come knocking, not yet. In fact, they reached a point where the couple had only a few dollars, were living off peanut butter, and kept their gear in an old car that barely ran. Still, Jim wrote, because even when he had nothing, he had stories. Everything changed in the early 1970s when Jim connected with producer Tommy West and engineer Maury Muleson, a classically trained guitarist whose delicate style blended perfectly with Jim's rugged vocals. In 1972, Croce released the album You Don't Mess Around with Jim, and suddenly radio listeners across America heard something different, something warm, funny, and relatable. The title track introduced a playful cast of characters and instantly became a hit. Operator, with its aching honesty, made people stop and feel. And Time in a Bottle, written for his newborn son, touched millions. Jim Croce became a household name, not because he was flashy, but because he was human. What set Jim Croce apart? First, his storytelling. Every song was a miniature movie, from the outlaw Bad Bad Leroy Brown to the sentimental Phone Call and Operator to the timeless Wish Time in a Bottle. Second, his honesty. Croce never pretended to be anything he wasn't. He wrote about the world around him, the people he knew, and the moments that stuck with him. And third, his emotional range. Few artists could jump from rowdy barroom tales to emotional ballads and make both feel so sincere. Croce once said, I'm not sure people want to hear songs about the good things. They want to hear about the things that went wrong and how you pulled through. And in many ways, that was his gift. He wrote songs that made people feel understood. Just as Jim Croce reached the height of his career, tragedy struck. On September 20th, 1973, after playing a concert at Northwestern State University in Louisiana, a small charter plane carrying Jim, his guitarist, and Marie Muleson, and several others crashed shortly after takeoff. Jim Croce was only 30 years old. The news stunned the world. This wasn't just the loss of a talented musician, it was the loss of a voice that still had so much left to say. Ironically, just one day before his death, Jim Croce wrote a letter to his wife Ingrid saying he was ready to stop touring and come home to spend more time with his family. He talked about wanting to live a quieter life, to write, to be a father, and to find peace. He never made it home. But Jim Croce's story didn't end in 1973. His music continued and still continues to touch people across generations. After his death, the song I Got a Name became a posthumous hit, and later Time in a Bottle soared to number one, a bittersweet reminder of how deeply his words resonated. Today, Croce is remembered as a poet of the working class, a master storyteller, and an artist who made simplicity sound profound. Listen to a Jim Croce song and you don't hear a superstar, you hear a friend. A guy at the end of the bar telling you a story you swear you've lived before. His catalog may be small, but his impact is enormous. Jim Croce's life reminds us that you don't have to live long to live meaningfully. It's not the years that matter, it's the moments. And through his music, Jim gave us moments we'll never forget. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Moments in Music. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to follow the show for more stories behind the artists who shaped our world. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and don't mess around with Jim.